All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this January for the California Apprenticeship Initiative's first webinar of the year. This is Caleb Van Docto. I'm coming to you from Oakland, where it's particularly wet and rainy for us. I imagine much of the state is probably getting some of what we're getting, and I'd say it's about time. Hopefully it's not too bad for everyone. I am glad to have with me this morning Katrina Meredith. She is the manager for Project Launch, the manager of Project Launch for Kitchens for Good in San Diego. And I'm so pleased to have her with us this morning because one of the biggest challenges that I know that apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs across the state face is how to deal with communicating to employers that the candidates that are coming from the programs that they are tapping into are going to be excellent candidates as they move into the job. I've seen, actually over several years, I've seen an idea that's kicked around website to website around how one can put themselves in the best position to interview for a job or prepare themselves for a job. And a piece of advice that keeps going around is this idea that you really need to answer 3 questions when you're getting ready for work for the employer. And that is, number 1, can you do the job? Number 2, will you love the job? And number 3, are you a fit for the position? And for programs that are running apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship models, those answers, at least 2 of them, should be rather clear for any employer or partner that's engaged with the system. Can they do the job? Ideally, any candidate that's coming through a program has developed the skills, and so that should be an automatic piece for anybody that's graduating out of the programs. Of course, they can do the job. They've already been doing it. There's a good model that's running here, one that's trustworthy, one that's really cranking out talent that can actually compete and complete the job that the employer is looking for. Are they going to love it? Ideally, someone who's been in a program for weeks or months or years has demonstrated a bit of dedication towards that particular career track. And it's something that they're really investing their time in and their energy, their resources to participate. So those 2 answers are usually right off the bat, really easy for employers and entities to recognize as a value that's coming from the programs. But figuring out if somebody's a fit, are they going to be a, air quotes, good cultural fit for our place of employment? Are they going to work well with others? Those are much more difficult answers for employers to figure out in an interview and for candidates to be able to communicate effectively when they're going into an interview or when they're transferring into a job. So I was really pleased when I was talking with Aviva Paley and Katrina Meredith from Kitchens for Good last year, in the middle of last year, learning a little bit about their pre-apprenticeship that they are developing currently, and I'll let Meredith talk a little bit about that, and also kind of catching up a little bit on the apprenticeship program that they have had running for the better part of a year or 2 at least, down in San Diego. And one of the things that really rose to the surface for me and seemed like a really nice model is they said, when we were putting together or trying to figure out how we get to that fit and how we get to teaching not just the hard, employment skills, the work skills that the students need to learn, but also those soft skills pieces, we actually developed a lot of that ourselves, and we're finding that's a real success. So I'm so pleased to be able to have Katrina on and share a little bit about the work that they've done to build this piece out. And hopefully there's some good information that will be valuable for other grantees as well from this webinar as you take what's said today and consider how that might apply to your own work. So a little bit of housekeeping. I think at this point we're probably mostly, if not all, familiar with Zoom. I'm glad to see that there's no technical issues happening with Zoom. Looks like everything's up and running, which is fantastic. We do have a chat box. Feel free to drop any questions or ideas or thoughts into there. We'll be monitoring it and make sure that anything that comes out of the chat is addressed, and we'll bring it up. We will have an opportunity to also have a little bit of back and forth and question and answer towards the end of this webinar as well, so you can certainly save your questions for then. And with that, what I would like to do is turn it over to Katrina. Katrina, perhaps if you want to give yourself a quick little additional introduction or anything, and then just let us know and we'll move the slides for you. And let me make sure that we have you off of mute. How about now?
I am unmuted. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm a fast talker, so feel free to tell me to slow down if I get carried away.
No
do you want to go ahead and hit the first slide?
Sure. There we go.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about Kitchens for Good. We are a culinary apprenticeship. So what we do is we train people with barriers to employment how to be a cook. They are with us Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4 for 10 weeks. Then we give them an internship, typically, or I guess you guys would call it an externship. Typically that lasts for a week and turns into paid employment as their first job. But if for some reason it doesn't, we bring them back on the 12th week to do one-on-one job search. Then we do the follow-up until they received all their apprenticeship hours, and we'll get the certificate from the state. So we are very mission-driven. We serve only people with barriers to employment. And what that looks like is people who are formerly or currently incarcerated, former foster youth, survivors of domestic violence, and also people with mental health or substance abuse issues. We are starting in the spring. We are hoping to start our baking apprenticeship. So everything we've learned from the culinary aspect will just carry over to that, and that's pretty exciting. Soft skills training. So why do we do soft skills training here? The reason in California that, and I'm sure it's national, that people get fired from jobs is not, in our case, it's not how they cook a chicken or how quickly they slice an onion. They get fired because they don't go to work on time or don't know how to communicate appropriately to the people they work with. So we found out you can be the best chef in the industry, but if you have an attitude, you're going to get fired. So we help the students learn how to be a good employee. And that's where the soft skills training comes in. We do it every day. So typically they start in the classroom with us at 8:30 in the morning for the soft skills training till about 10:30. And we do it between myself and we have a licensed social worker that also helps with it. And one of the reasons we do it, I know it kind of came up in a question internally, is we want to make sure the soft skills transition to part of every day and every lesson plan within the structure of Kitchens for Good as a whole. Does that make sense? Any questions yet? All right. Another thing we always like to make sure people are aware of, because of the population we serve, we are always, always employment focused. So what that means is we are not a social services program. We are a program that provides social services. What that also means is our expectations never drop because of a student's background or history. Our expectations are high and they always meet it. If we have to support them supplementally to meet those expectations, that's fine. If they have huge anxiety for a test, we help them out by doing a study group or study sessions with them, but we don't change the test. The real life doesn't work like that. You have to meet the expectations of your employer. It's all about you have to be qualified for the job you have. Your employer does not care if you don't have a car that runs, does not care that you were in prison or that your mom gave you up at 2 years old. They don't care. They want you to come in, be qualified for the job, and do a good job. Let me see if I've missed anything else. All right, you want to hit the next slide? So some of the soft skills we have are, it's up there, financial literacy. We have budgeting, things about your wages getting garnished, and living in San Diego can be really expensive. So we want our students to know what it's like to be able to rent a room or apartment. And things like this can cause complications just to, if you do have a significant criminal background, certain places are not going to rent to you. Transitional housing, what that looks like, and how expensive that can be, or transitioning out of it. We make sure our students are getting any resources like CalFresh if they're eligible for it, so that they can be successful when they are on their own. Budgeting, so we have a couple classes that we do, and we also have bank representatives come in and talk about that with the students, because sometimes they can't open bank accounts and they have to get special ones, and there are banks, typically credit unions, that are out there to help the students. We do like to use industry experts whenever possible, because it kind of brings stuff that we might not be the expert on into the classroom, and it gives the students another face and another connection. Garnishing wages. This is a huge thing for students when they get their first paycheck that they may not have had for several years, if ever. If they have child support or court orders that they have to pay for, it comes out of their check, and we make sure that they understand what that looks like and get a plan in place for them. Communication is probably one of the biggest soft skills that we work with, and this is ongoing from the very first day of school, even from their interview. I start correcting with appropriate behavior as soon as they sit down with us to interview to get into school. Some of the communication we work on, well, all of it, is verbal and body language, code switching, and knowing who your audience is. So, so we've got the verbal, what's obviously appropriate depending on who your audience is. How you talk to your boss, a colleague, is different than how you're going to talk to your girlfriend or your child. Body language, you guys have all heard of resting witch face, we'll call it. We've had to work on that with a lot of students, how just they look very aggressive and angry when they're just sitting there, and how they need to really be aware and cognizant of that, because it is off-putting. Code switching, again, how you talk to your buddies is not appropriate in the classroom, because that's not what employers need to hear. Again, knowing who your audience is. And we don't just do it with verbal or body language, we also do it with text message, emails, voicemails. One of our biggest things I'm trying to teach them, which sounds funny, but it's true, is stop using sentences that start with a pronoun, because I don't know who you're talking about, and you're continuing a conversation we had a week and a half ago. So to be expressful and articulate and intentional in your language. Social norms. So this is part of learning. It's all about reparenting when it comes to our population. Your parents teach you to say excuse me when you're interrupting a conversation. Our population isn't aware of that. So it's waiting your turn, looking at the social cues around you to make sure that it's okay to interrupt. If the door is closed and there's a heated conversation going on in the office, maybe you just need to come back in half an hour. Acknowledging people. We have students that we come and we say good morning to you, and they will just stare right through you. So teaching them how that's not a kind way to interact with people. So acknowledging when people are being kind, and the relevancy of it all. And we do that continuously throughout the day, all day long. Boundaries. Boundaries are a big one in our population. Our students want to overshare. So a lot of it can be that they feel because they go to different programs that if they don't tell you certain things about themselves, that they're being dishonest. So one of my biggest hurdles was during an interview, students want to tell you how long they've been sober for. And they think it's lying if they don't share that with you. So I finally talked to a friend of mine who is an NA for 12 years, and he's like, well, why don't you ask them if they would share if they had cancer? So I brought it up in class. Well, would you share that you're a breast cancer survivor? And they're like, well, no, that's nobody's business. Why would I do that? I'm like, exactly, it's nobody's business. So why do you want to share that you're 2.5 years sober? And they're proud that they're sober, and they should be. But the point we want to take away is you do not know who's interviewing you. And I get a little extreme on my example, but I'm like, what if the person who's interviewing you, their wife just fell off the wagon the night before and ran away with the postman? It's not going to bring good things up. So only share what's relevant for an interview is professional. Don't give stuff away. And also with boundaries, just being a good employee. We have students walk in and they'll talk about another colleague, like one of the employees that work here, and they'll be like, that girl with the big butt. That, and I'm like, you don't say that in a professional environment. It's not appropriate. You learn their names and we move forward from there. Community building. That is another big thing we do at Kitchens for Good as a whole, which is kind of a side effect that I didn't know was going to happen, but it's the biggest and best part of what we do here. And this can be from networking at events. So our students will get to go into the community, into some great events that we have in place, and they will get to work it and talk about Kitchens for Good. So they actually learn their own elevator speech and a Kitchens for Good elevator speech, which correlates into, we have a huge alumni capacity. So students get to talk to other graduates. And we've been doing this for 3 years this month, and we still have students from our first class, which we graduated March 3 years ago, come to our alumni meetings and still interact with us. So we do build a big support system, which gives them also another person to connect with and have as a resource that may not be staff, which I think is great. One thing we are trying to do, but we've had a little rough time, is that we'd like to get 12-step meetings going here, and it worked for a little while, but kind of died off. So that's one of our goals moving forward, because we do human-centered design here, which we ask the students and the alumni what they want and what works best for them, and then we try to meet their needs if possible. We also, whenever possible, we hire our alumni. The caveat with that, though, is they still have to be qualified and they have to be a good employee. And the capacity we hire them in is for cooks. We have also hired one as an admin assistant, and catering events, because we are a social enterprise. So the catering events part feeds into helping to pay for what we do, and it helps hire the people that we train. Ideally, we would like all our employees to be Kitchens for Good alumni. But again, if in your history with us in the classroom environment, you showed you could not get to school on time, we are not going to hire you to work for us until we have a reference from another employee that you switched that, addressed it, and have become more reliable. All right, strengths focused. One thing I love about what we do is we're strength focused. And what that means is, yes, you have to hit a barrier to employment to be able to be a part of Kitchens for Good class, but we don't care once you start. That's yesterday. We are forward focused. So we always work on attributes that these students have. It becomes part of their elevator speech. It becomes part of their day-to-day. And one thing that we hear consistently is this makes a difference in their life because we give them the respect that they deserve and we move forward. And we always consistently try to keep that theme going, even in how they work with each other and talk to each other. How do we evaluate what we do? It's consistent. That's another reason that we keep it internal, the soft skills training, is we make sure that all the teachers are consistent, or the instructors, in what goes on in the classroom to what goes on in the kitchen to what goes on when they are working a shift with events and catering. It's making sure that the message is consistent. And then we always course correct. So if it's just a teachable moment, like you walk in late with a Starbucks cup, the Starbucks drink is now mine, and you're gonna get a verbal warning. And then we make sure, just like a regular job, if the verbal doesn't work, then we do a written. If the written doesn't work, we'll give you a final one, and then you're gonna get terminated, just like the real world. We put this into their employee/student handbook when they first start with us. We go over it to make sure there's no surprises. We're consistent and fair, but we want to make sure that they know what they're getting into. We do not applaud them for showing up, because you don't get applauded for showing up to work. You have to actually work. So we make sure they realize that. One way we also keep it kind of, we always role model appropriate behavior within the classroom, within the kitchen, to make sure that they see how we do internal customer service with our colleagues, with our bosses, and with our students. But we also make sure that when we're doing this, we recognize people have bad days. We recognize that sometimes it is what it is. But if you have enough of a history with the place and you have a bad day, that's okay, because everybody will give you that. But if you're having too many bad days, then it's just a personality trait, and we need to work on that. One thing we help reinforcing appropriate behavior is positive reinforcement. So we like to catch them doing good things. We're learning that if you recognize them for doing that, they will stay and want to work hard for you. So we're excited about that, and we're looking to kind of formalize that a little bit more moving forward. All right, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so some of the classes we teach for the career readiness part, I thought I would go over. They go hand in hand with the soft skills, but they're a little bit more of a harder practice. So the elevator speech. We give the elevator speech, and I have them do one as a group doing a character so they don't feel too on the spot, and then they work on theirs. Then and we keep practicing it. So that's one of the first lesson plans we do. It takes a couple lesson plans, and then throughout the 10 weeks they're with us, I will put them on the spot to practice their elevator speech. And probably you all know what an elevator speech, but real quick, it's just a 30-second little bit of an intro about yourself, and they introduce themselves, and then they have to have 3 strengths that they have to describe about themselves and why they would be an attribute to the company they're working for. And it's probably the hardest lesson that some of our students have to wrap their head around. And we practice, and you will hear them at graduation speeches. They say, I hated Katrina for teaching this to me, but I'm so glad she did, because it makes a difference in the work world. We also do resumes like everybody. I'm a resume Nazi because I know I'm good at what I do, but I keep up on the literature through LinkedIn and things like that, resources like that to talk about what's current on a resume, what it should look good. And so their resume by the end is dynamite. networking. A lot of them don't realize everybody in their world is somebody can help them find a job. So we talk about who to ask for a job, what that looks like. We talk about references. Don't give somebody a reference if that person is going to say something bad about you. And I will call them and ask for a reference. And then using part of the networking is going to our events. And one of the best ones, we just had a graduation on Friday for class 14. So our current class will work the previous class graduation, so they get to see kind of what's in store for them moving forward. And it's a huge networking thing for them to kind of get started with, talk about themselves with, and just interact with people who are going to support them. Interviewing. We do a lot of mock interviewing, and again, we have some industry experts that come in because we have a mock interviewing final that they have to pass. And it's kind of round robin style. We'll have restaurateurs, we'll have HR managers come in and just give them different ways to interview with employers. And then part of it obviously is how to look for a job. A lot of our students have never had a job or certainly don't know how to look for it. So we go about how to do it online and just hitting the pavement sometimes. And then we do send out job leads. I send out job leads maybe once a week now. And then we'll always be available for students to come in and do job search with us. Our goal is to have the student work at a place for a year. And then it's a time to start asking for a raise or promotion, which typically they've already gotten because the industry really needs cooks. So we're grateful and lucky in that aspect. But it also might be a conversation of, okay, you've been a prep cook for a year and you feel like you need to be a line cook and this restaurant's not going to give it to you. Let's go to another one. We have great relationships with restaurants in the industry, but I have a couple restaurants that they're like, there is no room for growth. So if we can get a year and teach them everything we can, we're happy. And that makes everybody happy all the way around.
Hi, this is Aviva. I'm the Senior Director at Kitchens for Good. And I'll just add one more note around this. We talk to a lot of other culinary schools, both private and the community college ones. And in talking with some of the students that go through those programs, they'll tell us that they know how to cook, their skills are great, but they have no idea how to get a job. They've never written a resume before, they have never practiced interviewing formally before, and they don't even really know where to look. So I think that's where this piece is so critical in apprenticeship programs, because while we're there to help them get their first job, what happens when 2 years down the line, maybe they're not in touch with us anymore and they either are ready for a new job or lose their job and have to search again? We really need to teach our apprentices the skills so that they can continue to seek further employment, advance in their careers, and become independent from programs like ours so that they can really find that employment themselves.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Aviva. I think that's really right on. It's something that's a challenge. I know many in this group have probably heard me talk in the past about working direct service and running programs, especially focused on individuals with disabilities. And that's something that I know Voc Rehab sees a lot, which also has a goal of helping individuals find employment. And frequently what happens is individuals do manage to find employment. Maybe they're working with a program or a partner that's providing that service. They land that job, they hold it for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years or something, and then that job goes away. Maybe there's a recession, maybe something happens, and they're lacking the tools to be able to find another one. And so they end up coming back to Voc Rehab. And it creates this cycle of individuals who perhaps are new to disability in that particular case are not able to access all the services available because there's individuals who are returning who have been through the system 1, 2, 3 multiple times and are getting back to it over and over again. And so it really puts strain on the system. Obviously, there's other systemic issues about making sure that there's enough funding for everybody to achieve what they need. But I think it's admirable that the work that's happening is not just for the next job, but it's for future jobs. And so that's something that's particularly interesting and promising. Katrina or Aviva, were there other things? I've been just jotting down furiously as you've been chatting and have a whole slew of questions, but I wonder if there's other components that you guys wanted to share with us before then.
I think that's it. Yeah, I think we're good if you've got questions.
Okay, well, so I will, we've got another maybe about 35 minutes, 25 minutes or so. So I'll just remind folks, if you have questions, you can make sure to unmute yourself and let me, I actually drafted up some quick little instructions just to help folks here. So I moved it. If anybody has questions, you're certainly welcome to chime in and ask them. You can also type a question into the chat box and we'll make sure that that gets asked. I'll keep a monitor on that. And I wanted to start with just a little bit of a structural question about Kitchens for Good and how its program works. Because Katrina, you were mentioning early on that there was the culinary program and then there's the baking program that's relatively new. So just off the bat, how do those programs differentiate, especially as it relates to the work that you do, the soft skills training, the job readiness components? Are those the same or are those split in some way?
So our baking apprenticeship hasn't started quite yet, but we do have it programmed out how we're going to do it. Springtime is when we are looking to launch it. Mm-hmm. The career readiness and the soft skills is going to be exactly the same. And we plan on actually having the students in the classroom at the same time mm-hmm. to get those lesson plans. And it just builds their network up, yeah.
Okay, so does the soft skills run, am I right, I may have missed this right at the beginning, but does the soft skills run at the outset when people begin the program? Does it run concurrently with the cooking skills? Like, could you give us like a quick, maybe day in the life of what an individual does?
Sure. So our program is Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4. And every morning we start our class at 8:30 with the chef instructors, with the social worker, and with myself. And we kind of do a daily quote, check in, see, kind of do the house cleaning for the day and see how everybody's doing and maybe evaluate whatever happened the day before. And then the students stay in the classroom and we do soft skills training at that point. It's an hour and a half every morning. Mm-hmm. And then they go into the kitchen for the rest of the afternoon and the rest of the day. So every day.
And then I'll just note that as a social enterprise and apprenticeship program, we hire every one of our students on day one of the program, and they work 10 to 20 hours a week on top of their RSI component. What Katrina was just mentioning is all considered RSI. And then they work 10 to 20 hours a week in our own enterprise, doing on-the-job training, where we are always trying to reinforce what they just learned in the classroom while they're working our catered events and working in our contract meals enterprise. So our students it's a very big commitment when they're in the program. They tend to be here anywhere from 40 to 60 hours a week while in the program.
Great. That's super helpful. That's absolutely an intensive program too, and that makes a lot of sense. So Kitchens for Good is literally the hiring entity that you guys are bringing on, paying people for their time to be there for their work, and they're building not just the hard skills, working with the food preparation, working in the kitchen, working with their peers, but they're also getting some very explicit instruction in how to work effectively with their peers, how to work effectively with supervisors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great, that's great. So I'm curious then, why did Kitchens for Good, there's a lot of curriculum, there's a lot of lesson plans and conversation around soft skills. It's something that has, I've heard easily for at least a decade or two. I know that there's a lot that's out there, good and bad. I'm curious, why did Kitchens for Good elect to create their own program as opposed to, say, partnering with an entity that might provide that soft skills component, or going out and finding soft skills that exist in some other fashion, and bringing something that already exists to the program? Why did you create your own?
So I would say it was a bit of a combination of both and an organic growth. We started by stealing from the best. We were very generously given a curriculum by a similar organization called LA Kitchen that works with a similar population. And that really got us started with the first couple classes. And I think since then, it's really been adding lesson plans based on what we find is most needed. And perhaps those resources aren't out there, and perhaps it's just really customizing them to what we continue to see as challenges for our students. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of the work that Katrina does, aside from lesson plans, is that day in, day out modeling and course correction. So for example, it goes so far as, when someone says, "Hey, how's it going?" And they start saying, "Well, it was pretty good, except my, boyfriend who's in prison started calling me and doing this, this, and this," and saying, "Okay, actually, there's only one correct answer to that in a professional environment, and that answer is, I'm good, how are you?" So it's really that combination of formal classroom learning with day in, day out course correction, modeling behavior, and really reinforcing what appropriate workplace behavior is.
Mm-hmm. And as a caveat onto that, I would like to say, if somebody is complaining about their boyfriend in prison doing something, we have a social worker who sits with these students every week for at least a half an hour to an hour to make sure they're getting support in an appropriate way for their personal life. Now, not all students need the same amount of time because they're in programs we don't want to over therapy these guys, but if they need it here, we give it to them here in an appropriate manner that does not take away from the employment perspective and is confidential on a different level, because our students are going through a lot and they may need a shoulder just to let us know what's going on.
Great. And so that actually kind of leads me into a question, which is, it sounds like there's some degree of a blend of an individual type of program. You're bringing in a social worker, and so there's some sort of customization that's happening at the individual level, and yet you're also running cohort classes. You mentioned this, you're about to graduate, I think you said your 14th class. And so... Yeah. So I'm curious, how do the soft skills components, how are you able to teach these different components if people have different goals or different areas that they're focused on, or if there's customization? Could you speak a little bit to how that works, working with a cohort while still addressing the individual?
Sure. It's just what we do. All of our... Check. It's so funny. It is all individualized. Wow. So we make sure, you notice when somebody's acting kind of funny and you check in with them. And Jill and I are very good about, even in the kitchen, if something's weird, or the chef, we all communicate very well. So we just found out a student yesterday, one of her best friends got shot. And so we asked her if she wanted to go home or if she wanted to stay, and she chose to stay. And then I made it very clear that if she needs to talk to me outside of class or take a minute, we're available to her. There's an analogy that talks about, because I come from a background of being a credentialed teacher, and it says, if you have a classroom of 30 kids, but one kid has a cough, do you give all the kids cough syrup? No, you give it to the one kid that needs it, and that doesn't take away from anybody else. So some of our students are gonna need more support because they don't have it otherwise. It's very intuitive. That's who we draw in here to work here.
And I would also just mention that just as you would with a culinary training or any technical training, you are assessing students on proficiencies. And just as we would say, okay, Tommy is really slow on his knife cuts or is not really mastering the sauces, we can do the exact same thing for saying, okay, Jesse is not really nailing the elevator speech, or he's continuing to have a bad, come in late or have a bad attitude. And so we have created a method of tracking those things, both for attendance, attitude, and these proficiencies like elevator speech, resume writing, interviewing skills that, again, are these one-on-one assessments of their grades, of their proficiencies, just as you would with any technical training.
And also, we have had students where something has gone awry, and we want to make sure that these students don't get another door closed because they've had a lot of closed doors in their life. So we have had students that we've kept longer than other students because maybe their anxiety got so out of control, or we're like, okay, that one student in particular, his anxiety was so bad, we're like, you need to go make a doctor's appointment, you need to get your meds fixed, we're going to support you through this, but I am not going to get you a job because you are not capable of working yet. And then he is. It all works out.
Great. There's a question in the chat from Steve. He says, you have an impressive list of sponsors. Are any of them providing employment opportunities for your students?
I think all our sponsors provide employment opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, we work with excellent restaurateurs. There is a cook shortage in San Diego. So I have to tell people all day long that I do not have a student for them. No, everybody wants to help. Getting jobs for our students is not difficult.
That's great. So so it sounds like since there's a shortage, you find that employers are coming to your door and
absolutely.
asking for, okay. That's pretty fantastic. It sounds like you really tapped on a major need in San Diego, and I imagine it exists in many other places of the state as well.
Definitely. So,
following on the employment piece, I wonder, have employers provided any input on the content that you trained? Because I imagine that depending upon the employer that you're working with or the employer that's hiring, they may want to see particular skills that really support the type of food or the type of culture that they have operating.
Absolutely. And we have 2 meetings a year where we bring employers in to have more of a formalized session about that. But we are also in constant contact with our employers, and they give feedback immediately if there's an issue. The number one thing that came back was following directions. So we brought that into our curriculum. And one thing that's great about Kitchens for Good is we get feedback. We can pivot and adjust immediately. This may be a lesson plan. I talk to an employer, so I bring that lesson plan in 24 hours later because that's what's important out there. One of the biggest feedbacks we got is students need, when the chef gives them directions, they need to not say anything and follow the directions. Something as simple as if the prep cook, which is our student, is chopping carrots and the chef comes in and says, stop chopping carrots, I need you to start chopping onions. The student needs not to say, okay, give me 5 minutes, I'll do it. No. You put the carrots away and you start chopping onions. When it's become an issue of something a little bit more personal, we've had some students relapse or there's been attendance issues. Employers are good with getting in touch with me to see if we can support the person and get them back on track.
And I think one other piece is something that we are really hyper aware of while they're employees here at Kitchens for Good is also communicating around attendance, no calls, no shows, if someone's running late. What Katrina is really good at reiterating with students is that employers can be understanding if there's a solid reason. And if your car breaks down and you have a flat tire or the bus just didn't come that day, people can understand that, but the solution is to not call and not show up. It's all about communication and proper communication, and not a text message that says, yo, won't be there, good luck, but really, doing the responsible way of communicating with your employer to really communicate attendance properly.
Is there content, especially out of the soft skills program, that you find that employers are particularly partial to? And I suppose you've spoken a little bit about this already. You've talked about employers wanting good communication, just as you were mentioning here. But I'm curious, is there, when you're having initial conversations with employers, potentially future partners that you're bringing in, or entities that are going to be hiring some of your students, they're looking for a certain amount of skill, a certain specific number of skills. And I kind of want to see if you've had any of these points where you either have employers that are maybe asking for different things and you're needing to find a way to flex the curriculum to be able to support both of those employers. And then if there's a particular skill or set of skills that our employers are consistently saying, we need this, we need this, we need this.
I think, a prep cook is a prep cook, or a line cook is a line cook. Even though we do not ever sell on a deficit. So the employers, if they don't know who Kitchens for Good is, and that happens a lot of times when I'm doing cold calling, I don't sell on anything other than I have a qualified prep cook who has finished our program, who, won our black box challenge. Those kind of conversations could happen later with the employer as they get to know more of what we do and come to a graduation or things like that. I wouldn't say there's anything specific that employers need that we haven't addressed.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you hear from employers in this industry especially, but I think across the board, is first and foremost, they're looking for people who, have a certain base level of skills, but beyond that are going to show up consistently and have a good attitude. And so much of what we're teaching is attitude and responsibility, because as with apprenticeship programs and just general places of employment, most employers are willing to work with you to advance your technical skills and continue teaching you on the job to advance those skills. What they're not willing to teach you is how to care, how to show up on time, or how to be a respectful human. Those things they are expecting as a base level of what your responsibility is as an employee. So that's really, I think, what we are providing and focusing our training on.
And also, I think, to kind of piggyback on that, sometimes there is training that I give to the employer as to why certain things aren't working. And also, maybe they don't need to give employees as many chances, and a lesson needs to be learned so that they can take that to the next job. But I have a couple employers that I don't work with anymore because it wasn't a good environment for our students, because they didn't pay enough for what their expectation was. Mm-hmm. And in our world of culinary, we're very lucky that we can do that because there is a shortage of cooks. And so if I can get one of my students a job for $14 an hour versus minimum wage for the same job, that's where I'm going to shoot out for, as long as it's a good working environment.
Have you found that employers have, that's been for lack of a better term, like a leverage point in how you communicate with employers, the fact that you can sell you have a good product you're bringing to the employers, and you can say, look, we'd love to have you. We don't need to have you. You know, I think this is something that...
No, I don't. I have never really done that. I've just been, like we had one where the kitchen, they would bully people. So I'm like, even though it sounded like a really great opportunity and I was excited to have them as an employer, it was consistent with our interns that I was just like, nope, I'm just not going to work with them anymore. But I didn't really express that to the kitchen because it was a huge corporation. But another one, I was like, you know, you have to bring up your salary, your wage. And you know what? Unfortunately, that place couldn't do it because it's family owned, and I understand it. I understand that, but I have to look out for the best, you know, for my students.
Absolutely.
And I think to that point, we do, you know, we can bring our students are working at all of the top finest restaurants in San Diego that have the most awards. They're working at the Hilton, Sheraton, and other 5-star hotels. And I think doing some of that name dropping as well certainly helps. But as Katrina mentioned, we do not have a shortage of employers. I would say we have a shortage of students to meet the growing demand, which is really part of the reason why we're expanding to the baking apprenticeship program as well. We've seen a huge need there. And then this next year, we're growing our total number of apprentices from 100 a year to 175 a year.
That's impressive. And I just want to draw a line between, I think, a conversation that we had last year with Dan Weeks and Michael Spicchiola from SLO. We're talking also about, you know, working in an industry where there's a shortage of employees, of workers, and when engaging with employers, you're in a circumstance where you have very competitive employers who are also maybe well-known names, and the way that you present your program and your candidates, your students that are coming out of the program, this is top talent. We're here to come a little bit more at an even level. You're not coming from, you know, please hire our students, please hire our graduates, but it's much more of, this is a wonderful opportunity for you. We can guarantee this is a strong resource for you to leverage, and it's something that your competitors are using.
Absolutely.
Great. I had, you know, just one, maybe two other questions, but we have about 5 minutes left, and so I just wanted to let anybody know that's listening as well, if you had any questions, especially as it relates to your programs, or anything that was just at the tip of your mind and you want to bring it up right now, is a great time to do so before we sign off. You can also type it into the chat as well. And what I want to ask is, are there particular program components when it comes to soft skills that you find your students are particularly challenged with? And just to circle back and to verify, it sounds like all of your students are individuals that have at least a barrier to employment, and I believe many of them are individuals that are reentry or that are coming out of the jail or prison system. Are there? So I guess first question is: are there other barriers that you see on occasion, and what are those? And then, are there particular components of the soft skills training program that you find the students really struggle with, and which ones do they gain the most in?
Other barriers, you talked about reentry, and then we do the mental health and substance abuse, people who have become stable through that. We do former foster youth, and then survivors of domestic violence. Not to say if a barrier doesn't fall into that bucket that we're not going to talk to that person, but that's typically who we do our outreaches for. When it comes to the soft skill training that the students struggle with, it would definitely be the elevator speech. That is, they hate it. But then I always get a kudos after class and graduation because they use it so much when they go out there and interview. And then I would say the one that we're just constantly adjusting is communication and what that looks like. I mean, we had a student once who we would just walk in the morning and be like, fix your face, because she just looked so angry and mean. But she was really great about listening to what we had to say, adjusting accordingly, and working through it, which is a great success story.
Yeah. My one other question that I just wanted to ask about how you deliver the soft skills content is more about the structure of it, which is, is there a particular order that training happens? Because you listed a lot of areas that you had on the slide, and then sub areas within it. You were talking about financial literacy and communication, social norms, and there were like these sub areas that you engage in. And so do you shuffle or move lesson plans around within that curriculum, or are you operating off of a book and you're kind of going through step 1, step 2, step 3?
We do have a set curriculum and we do have a set syllabus, but we will adjust according if we need to. We had a issue with our last class about cohesiveness. So what we did is we dropped everything and did a couple lesson plans on teamwork, communicating with team, and did some surveys to see what was going on and how we could meet their needs.
Great.
So though we do follow a format, it can adjust accordingly.
Great. That's a pretty powerful tool to be able to move things around too. And I would imagine it's also yet another way to communicate both to prospective students who are considering the program as well as to employers that this is something that's adaptable, it's mutable, it can really fit your needs while ensuring that it's hitting all the key points that one would expect a program to hit.
Well, and that's what I think makes us work here. Is it's logically based. If this is what you need to do today, do it.
Great. Amanda and Aviva, I want to thank you both, especially Amanda. Thank you so much for the information that you shared. This was super helpful, very interesting. It definitely gets my wheels spinning about how these sorts of tools and training tips can really apply to other industries as well, and how things might be incorporated, especially for programs that are working with individuals with barriers to employment and others. Let me just drop a quick little contact information. I suppose, not to speak for you, Katrina, but I have your email up here, my email up here, if anybody has follow-up questions that they want to share or reach out to and ask about. You can certainly reach out to me and I can make sure it gets forwarded. There's Katrina's contact up there as well. And I want to thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We'll have this recorded and up and shared with the group as well. Thanks again. I hope everybody has a really wonderful rest of the week. Stay dry, do great work, and we look forward to seeing you down the line.
Have a great afternoon, you guys.
Thanks, everybody.